Fungus have a wide range of abilities that is fundamental to what it means to be a fungus. So this is a majority of them are like this or have these abilities. Some of these include spatial recognition and decision making, recognizing self versus non-self, short-term memory and learning, as well as long-distance communication. They can react and interpret information from light to chemicals to sound and movement and weight and touch. They can grow against gravity, and they can grow around, into, and fuse with other organisms or with other hyphae. They also have fighting behavior or hunting behavior, meaning they're able to actively participate in the takedown of another organism. And now for what is probably their two most famous abilities, which is trade and manipulation behavior. Fungus participate in what's called a biological market, in which two organisms exchange some sort of goods, service, resource, or commodity for another. Fungus is able to communicate the information that they receive from all of those listed abilities through something that is very similar to a central nervous system. Mycelium is not a central nervous system, but it takes advantage of the same thing that a central nervous system does, which is spike trains. Spike trains are electrical information that encode data of some sort. It could be sensory information, it could be memory, it could be any sort of cognitive ability. Our neurons use spike trains to encode that information, which we can then tap into when we're doing anything or memorizing anything or talking about anything. Those spike trains are how fungus can talk to each other or communicate across different species, such as a mycorrhizal network or an infection. Their languages can have up to about 50 words. A language is a way of transcoding information. So we have an alphabet, and those letters can form words, and those words have definitions, and so you can form sentences without having to memorize entire books. So information and ideas can be carried only by knowing the cipher. Pretty much every electrical system uses that same way of recording information, which is a sequence of spikes and non-spikes. The way our brains work is that those spike trains are recording information that we can then draw from in order to memorize or say something that has a memory-based association. The way that Mycelium use it is basically as their language directly. Instead of encoding the information and then translating it, they just use the fundamental way that it works, which is the spike trains. The Mycelium is their body and their mind and their senses and their perception and the way that they grow and the way that they interact with the world. Pretty much every single species of fungus is capable of anastomosis. It's where one tube or channel or fiber is able to connect to another. And that's why fungal infections can be so hard to get rid of, because they are basically integrating. They're becoming a part of whatever they are growing on. And through that, they're then able to communicate with the host organism. This is how mycorrhizal fungus works, this is how myconization works, and this is how infection works. The consciousness of a mycelium is probably closer to a multitude of selves. So it's not a hive mind, but it's more like a collective consciousness. The fungal way of obtaining information, of memorizing it, and then utilizing or translating that information is what makes them so effective as manipulators. Mycelium can communicate with the nerves of any part of a body that they are integrating with, because they use the language of the spike trains. This allows them to receive and upload and have cross-communication with themselves and their host organism. Depending on the fungus-host relationship, it could be used in trade, it could be used in modulating behavior, or it could be used in parasitism. Just because there is a fungal infection doesn't mean there's not a level of biomarket taking place. The exchange is not always resources. The fungus may be taking resources, but it's in exchange giving some kind of information that it obtains through its consciousness, immortal memory, or its perception of senses. I say immortal in the sense that they have their selves, and their growths of the selves keep branching off into being more selves. This means that we could define fungal archetypes. Someone who obtains power is corrupted by it. The power-corruption dynamic is motivated or caused by fungus. This is the idea or the inspiration of the imagination for things like magic and extrasensory abilities and knowledge that's coming from another place, or even demonic pacts or demonic possessions. The idea that you can exchange your health for knowledge or power. Why? Because the progression of the fungal infection causes health issues while it also is sending information to the host. Now, the variables are numerous. What kind of fungus, what kind of infection, what kind of a person is it? The trope of a haunted forest or haunted or corrupted or possessed king or wizard or what have you is that of being in a dark, damp area, and it's the spreading of that darkness, and there's usually some sort of growth that corrupts everything and kind of connects it through a singular sort of conscious entity. And that figure who is corrupted is usually under the possession of that fungal growth. The way that they beat it is usually through some like holy light or some kind of divine magical powers. So that these tropes and archetypes, they come from fungally motivated or fungally inspired imaginative reactions to fungal infections in the first place. Part of what may be hard to conceive of this is the paradigm we're sort of under, which is that humans are these closed off biological boxes. The benefit of the holobiont model of humans is that systems move between and through us. We are an ecological system, but we are not separated from the greater ecological systems around us. And this is because the language of chemicals and sensory information and genetics and electrical spike trains are shared between species. What's different is their bodies and how they interpret them and how that information is then utilized by the organism. Fungus are simply masters of receiving information and translating it across species, as well as integrating with those species, which is how they do it in the first place. The imagination still works by the use of spike trains, and so something is able to tap into that if it can infect you, which is what fungus do. We have created this idea of cyborgs, of we could integrate robots to humans, but that's basically how all life operates. Organisms are able to combine and integrate with each other, or take advantage of each other, manipulate, trade, and all kinds of things from altruism to parasitism. And this is what superorganisms are: symbiosis and full integration, kind of like the mitochondria coming from bacteria, or different organs deriving from different organisms that then became part of the full system, part of the integration of an entire whole. Fungus just happened to be basically an organism that has designed itself for that purpose specifically, to be a hacker, to be a manipulator, a trader, and a communicator. In the broad sense of the entire kingdom of fungus as a universal version of that, obviously they specify, mycelium to tree roots, or mycelium to different plants or animals, or whatever their environment that they tap into, whatever niche that they are part of. Their goals, or to what end they do this, is probably not immediately obvious to us because of their perceptions and lifespans work quite a bit differently. The idea of tapping into a higher consciousness that we tend to associate with like divine inspiration is simply getting onto the level that fungus perceive and use knowledge. In other words, the way in which their cognitive and conscious sensory information is perceived is able to be merged with ours through something like an infection. And to us, this gives us insight into things we would never be able to conceive of normally, because it's simply a exchange of perceptions. And that being an organism that is a completely different life form from us. Yet there's enough in common that there is a compatibility between them, mostly because that's how fungus designed themselves to be. We can explore this topic more specifically on the way in which fungus work, or the way in which the imaginative process works, like how it kind of inspired certain ideas of power, corruption, and magic and things like that. But thanks for watching.